Well, thank you so much for watching Morning Live. And as you can see there to my right, which is probably your left, our sign language interpreter with us now is Phumza Sekumba. And welcome to Phumza. Well, we're talking now about the announcement by President Cyril Ramaphosa last night. It's all we have been talking about. But South Africa has shifted gear in its fight against coronavirus. President Cyril Ramaphosa last night against announcing a 21-day nationwide lockdown, which takes effect at midnight on Thursday. And this comes after the number of cases rose to 402 yesterday, and that was a six-fold increase in infections in the country. And some provinces and municipalities have also taken their own measures to try and curb the spread of COVID-19. Gauteng has the highest number of cases in the country, with the provincial health department introducing additional measures, while Cape Town and eThekwini metros announced the closure of parks and beaches. And joining us now via telephone is Professor Mcebisi Ndletyana to reflect on what was said by the President last night. Professor Ndletyana is, of course, with the University of Johannesburg. Professor, good morning, and thanks so much for speaking to us on Morning Live today.
Good morning, Sakina.
So firstly, your opinion on the President's address last night.
I thought the address was quite direct, specific with certain measures that we need to take. I think the President did not try to hide anything, and this has been the approach from the beginning, that you need to be clear, transparent, and not hide anything. Because after all, with these things, if you try to hide something initially, it eventually comes out. So yesterday, I think, was the time when they told us the entire picture, what can possibly happen. I think Italy and other parts of the world have alerted us to the scale of the catastrophe that might befall us if we don't act. And I think the President wanted to register that message yesterday, that we needed to act urgently and take very serious decisions. In fact, we are ahead of some of the countries. Britain, for instance, announced some of these measures 2 or so hours after we had. So I was quite impressed with that announcement.
Do you think, that this is what is needed to take us in the right direction right now in terms of spreading curbing the spread of COVID-19, because government has appealed to South Africans for social distancing and trying to implement on their own, appealing to people to implement measures that would break the back of this virus, but it hasn't been effective?
Well, the main worry, Sakina, was that even though initially most of the infections were caused by people who had traveled abroad, it began to emerge in the last few days that you also had local infections, which means that the spread of the disease is being transmitted by locals from one local to another, people who had not traveled, and that limit contact. It hasn't been effective. For instance, this past weekend, I had reports of people going to funerals. One funeral on Saturday, you had almost 1,000 people. Another on Sunday, you had more than 800 people. So that's the kind of contact the President had tried to prohibit, where he said there shouldn't be a gathering of more than 100 people. So my guess is that people weren't taking this seriously. So after yesterday, especially because we have the police and soldiers roaming around our streets, I think there will be more seriousness.
And there has, of course, to be, a consideration at some level also of people's rights. And we see this especially in the French situation, whereby people are trying to enforce their constitutional rights and balance that with what government is trying to do in curbing the spread of the virus. With the advance of the SANDF onto our streets, how do you think that's going to work, Professor?
You see, in situations like this, you have to prioritize security and public interest. Whereas we do have rights of individual movements to go wherever we choose. But the point is, in our individual existence, when we do move, we move into a public space. It may well be, as entitled as we are, to move, we're infected with a disease, we move into a public space, we then infect other people. So our movement then imposes harm on others. So it is then the responsibility of the state to ensure that the others, the public, is protected from the possible harm that might come from your exercise of individual rights. Your rights are not unrestricted. There are restrictions, yet you can exercise them, and this is very important. You can exercise them to the extent that they don't harm others. That's the limitation. So in this case, I'm afraid your individual rights of movement should be curbed because they pose possible harm to others.
Now, Professor Ndletyana, as South Africans, we have been, for obvious and various reasons, preoccupied with the state of our economy, and the knock-on effect of this particular measure by government is going to be felt across the range of business sectors. So again, here, what do you think should be done? You know, the sort of measures that we should see in order to make sure that everybody is actually taken care of and that people don't go into secondary panic about their financial situations, quite apart from the panic that is caused by the spread of the virus.
That's the seriousness, Sakina. That's where the gravity of the entire situation comes in. Secondly, firstly, and which is very fundamental, is that already you have an ailing economy with low levels of revenue collection. So the state is very little to aid us, right? Because the reserves there's nothing there. We're already on a deficit. So that means that they will have to scrape around for the little that they can get, and also get the private sector to assist. So you have those two sources of possible aid, and yet on the other hand, you compare to the problem that is likely to emerge out of this. A lot of companies have closed down. They will remain closed for the next 21 days or so. It might even be more. Who knows? Without production, there's no money coming in. The restaurant industry, for instance, that one is going to be hit hard. Tourism is also going to be hit extremely hard. So we have heard measures announced by the president. There is a donation scheme that has been set up. There are all sorts of tax rebates that are going to be provided. The Rupert family, Oppenheimer family, I think, each provided R1 billion towards the fund. These are good measures. These are good measures. They are a demonstration that we care for others and we are aware of the severity of the impact that this might have on the economy. But whether or not they are going to limit the damage, Sakina, I don't know. Especially because we're not sure how long this. It might well end within the next 21, 25 days. If it does, then that would be good, I think. But if it prolongs beyond that, then the problem will remain with us for a while.
Even if it is just for the set 21 days at the moment, Professor, if we look at the car manufacturing industry, for example, that contributes 7% to GDP locally, what sort of impact will this type of scenario have on communities such as Eitenaga in East London, where many people actually work on those plants, especially if those are going to be locked down for 21 days or the possibility of an extension even exists? What are we going to look like coming out of this lockdown period?
In the Nelson Mandela region, for instance, Akina, you have an unemployment rate of about 36%. And as you rightfully say, VW is the major source of employment there. I'm afraid you are likely going to have more retrenchments. In fact, I think just recently, a couple of months ago, they had voluntary retrenchments. So it hasn't been doing well, the industry in that part of the world. So you're going to have more and more retrenchment. But I guess if one were to be optimistic, Sakina, is that a crisis forces people to do things that they have been somewhat reluctant to do. That region has a lot of potential. You have the ocean economy, you have the shale gas research that has been going on, you have oil exploration that has been going on, you have the wind energy. It is the hub of energy in the country. And a lot of programs have been, for some reason, put on hold. Money is committed, but it hasn't been happening. So perhaps with a crisis that is likely to widen, it will add or exert a sense of urgency on the part of the political leadership at Bisho and in Pretoria to expedite, these drastic economic measures that we need to have in our country, because there are projects that can potentially reinvigorate our economy, but there's been a lot of hesitance and focusing on non-important things.
And just as we wrap this, Professor, if you take, for example, what's happening in the U.S. and where the debate is at there in terms of the stimulus package between the Republicans and the Democrats, it's about where the money is actually going. And we've heard some news from the banks, but obviously we need a lot more clarity, a lot more detail, especially to allay fears for small and micro enterprises, especially because what needs to be done? What sort of messaging do we need to come from government that will ensure that if there is some relief, it actually does go into the hands of those who need it most? And the financial institutions, what more can they, what more should they do in order to show not just solidarity, but patriotism at a time like this?
America actually tells us what can possibly happen at times like this. People wanting to profit, to exploit this crisis. Medical material, for instance, medical staff has been extremely expensive. Private care companies are exploiting this to make more money. Fortunately, nowadays, the president has said something, that banks, for instance, will also try not to punish people for not paying their bonds and loans. That is just a statement. Whether or not the banks will actually do that is something else altogether. But the banks and everyone else should be careful that we will live beyond this crisis and will remember who at the time of need chose to exploit a human crisis. And I don't think whoever is found to have exploited this crisis will be easily forgiven. So they should be careful.
Well, thank you so much, Professor Mcebisi Ndletyana from the University of Johannesburg, for discussing both the President's speech last night as well as the way forward with regard to COVID-19. And that brings us up to